Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and we will be diving into an insightful discussion about the US President Donald Trump's tariffs on China, Mexico and Canada, as well as the European Union. The newly sworn-in US President Donald Trump has begun executing all promises made during his campaigns. Trump is considering imposing a 10% tariff on imports of Chinese-made goods as soon as February the 1st. He also called China an abuser. Trump's comments followed his threats to levy import taxes of 25% on Mexico and Canada, accusing them of allowing undocumented immigrants and drugs to come into the United States. Not just this, Trump also vowed to hit the European Union with tariffs. Shortly after he was sworn in, he also instructed federal agencies to conduct a review of existing trade deals and identify unfair practices by US trading partners. In response, China promised to safeguard its national interests, while the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has promised to fight back. It is to be seen how Trump executed his proposed tariff plans, notably because Canada, China and Mexico are the top US trading partners. We are going to dive into a discussion about this topic. We are joined today by three guests. Raymond Vickery, former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joining us from Washington. Daniel Wagner, CEO of Country Risk Solutions, joining us from Portland. And Charles Thompson, Australian journalist, who is joining us from Australia. Raymond Vickery, I wanted to come to you first on this topic. What are the core reasons behind Donald Trump's administration adopting tariffs on all these countries? Trump has said tariff is his favorite word. What are the reasons for these?
Well, thanks very much for having me. Indeed, he has made these statements. He's in love with tariffs. It seems to me that he has an affection for this blunt instrument on at least three grounds. One, he actually seems to believe that, in fact, the foreigner is the one who pays the tariff. In fact, it is the importer, the U.S. importer, which pays it. But nevertheless, he believes that he can establish an external revenue service which will make the United States rich. Second, he thinks that protectionism will be very good for U.S. industry. And third, he's just using it as leverage to try to force other countries to bend to what is his will. This is a very, very serious matter, and it's a serious matter for U.S.-India relations as well as the other countries that you have indicated. He does not seem to make a differentiation in terms of his broader statements between friend and foe. And he's talked about tariffs on all Indian goods. He said that India, along with China, is an abuser. He doesn't seem to make a distinction there. And he's also said that in regard to countries which are in the BRICS, if they try to do anything that's outside the normal payment relationships, that he will impose the tariffs there. And of course, India is a founding member of the BRICS. So this is very serious across the board. One of the things that makes it so absurd is the United States tried this once before. Back in the Depression, we had the Smoot-Hawley tariffs. They were a disaster, and all they did was to deepen the Depression. So often there's a method in the madness of Trump, and it seems to me, though, that here there's more madness than there is method.
Daniel Wagner, I want to pass it to you now. Trump seems to think that tariffs can do no wrong, but what are the potential consequences that could do bad for America if Trump imposes all these tariffs on all these powerful nations?
So Trump is acting either like a neighborhood bully or a mob boss in trying to impose such tariffs and such policies on other nations. Obviously, it's going to have a negative spiraling effect on all of the affected nations. The average nation is very likely to come back with countervailing duties, and then we just get into a sort of a economic death spiral. But in terms of the impact of these proposed tariffs on America, I think there's likely to be a near-term benefit, right? A sort of a coffee jolt, if you will. But then after the coffee high has worn off, we start coming down to earth. And at the end of the day, those American consumers who don't yet realize that this is going to have a direct effect on them and their wallets will soon come to realize that. And if we have these countervailing duties, as are likely to be expected, consumers in many other countries are then going to start feeling the same thing. That's not going to be good for the American economy or for the global economy. And I think it's probably not going to take too long, certainly in the course of this year, where these impacts are likely to be felt.
Charles Thompson, I want to move on to China first of all. Trump has cited the importation of fentanyl to Mexico and Canada for this. What other specific economic practices or policies in China were cited as justification for the US imposing potential tariffs like this?
I'm actually in Benares next to the Kumbh at the moment. I see it quite differently to the other gentleman. Before we come to China, I would say that I think he's wanting a deal. The first deal he's going to get is with India. India is playing the game beautifully. My guess is that both China and Russia might come up with some surprises in a deal. Where the complications arise is in Australia, our government's going into election, so it doesn't know what it's doing. Canada's in the same boat, and Britain's in a mess too with its politics. So it's very hard to predict. But if we go back to China, Trump already said that he had a deal that he was ready to go in place with Xi Jinping. And he's already spoken to him. I mean, it's amazing. Even before he was officially came in as the president, he's had some long conversations with China. And China wants to negotiate. Russia wants to negotiate. India wants to negotiate. And it may be the first time in many years, or probably ever, that we see that America's got deals in place with these three countries before Europe, Canada, Australia, the UK.
Raymond Vickery, I just want to get your response to that quickly. I'll just give you a chance to respond.
Well, hope always springs eternal, that in fact he doesn't mean what he says in terms of across the board, that it's just a negotiating tactic. It's, part of the art of the deal. But I think these other countries will have to ask themselves, how much do they want to be bludgeoned by this blunt instrument when the entire world economy has been set up under an international order that the WTO has put into effect, so that there are mechanisms for resolving differences, that there are concessions made to some who need them, and that there is a multilateral system. That system will be out the window. And so you can say, oh, well, it's going to be fine because the negotiation will turn out to be just something which ameliorates difficulties rather than causes adverse consequences. But that's a very, very dangerous game, because you have as likely a situation, even though there is political turmoil in some of these countries, that this is the one thing that can pull people together. You take in Canada, I don't think very many Canadians want to be the 51st state. And if the tariffs are being used to bludgeon public policy in Canada on the question of immigration, how far will Canada go in terms of bending to the Trump will? It's a very, very dangerous game. One would hope that saner minds are going to prevail. And indeed, even within the Trump camp, there are those who say that this is not an appropriate way. This is one of the reasons that the tariffs were not announced on day one, as he had said that he was going to do, and have been kicked down the road. There are people, such as the incoming Secretary of the Treasury, who say, look, this is not economic reality. So there is dissension within the camp of Trump in itself. And it's possible that we can have some good outcomes. There's no question that China has been an abuser of the international system. Indeed, there's no question that India has done that upon occasion. And indeed, you can't exempt the United States. But we did have an approach in a multilateral system for being able to resolve these on some sort of rational basis rather than my way or the highway, but we'll just try to see who's tougher and who can win out in the end for their own self-interest.
Raymond, I wanted to move on to China with Daniel. How would these tariff exchanges impact global supply chains, especially in the technology and manufacturing sectors, which China obviously thrives in?
I wanted to say, first of all, that my view is that the global supply chain functions based on norms and trust. If we don't have norms and we don't have trust, it doesn't work. And one of the things that we need to keep in mind also is that China, as well as other countries that embark on bilateral trade agreements, often break those agreements. So the assumption that we're going to find deals with all of these countries and they're going to work very well and they're going to stick and no one's going to go outside the boundaries, I think it's fallacious. China has proven again and again that they don't abide by the rules, and they utilize the international system for their own benefit. They've certainly utilized the bilateral relationship with the US and other countries to their own benefit, and they've been absolutely shameless about that. Part of the issue, I think also more broadly, is that we have, as Americans, ourselves to blame for many of our problems, because we have rules on the books that allow things to happen that shouldn't happen. You can say that about trade or immigration or any number of other things. So if we don't fix the underlying problem, why do we have these trade imbalances? Why do we allow them to occur in the first place? Why didn't we put some boundaries around this decades ago with China? We were the ones, America and the rest of the world, who made China the epicenter of global manufacturing. We have ourselves to blame for that. China didn't put a gun to our head. They utilized that to their maximum benefit, and who can blame them? So, in essence, I think there's great reason for skepticism about whether any of these deals with any of these countries is ultimately going to work.
Charles Thompson, to what extent do these tariffs reshape China relations beyond trade?
Okay, the first thing, I find it quite funny to say this. Nobody can, ignore the United States. It's too big, and every country will have to deal with the United States. Doesn't matter what your politics are. It doesn't matter if you like Trump or you don't like Trump. Every single country on the planet will have to. I totally agree with the last gentleman talking about the fact that the Chinese will agree to something and then break the rules. But at the end of the day, every country has to negotiate. But I still hold the view that what's going to be fascinating, whether these last or not, that's a completely different question. But we're going to be finding some of these countries like Russia, China, and India sitting down, having deals, and then the rest of the Western world trying to catch up. with them and do deals. Whether they last, whether they're practical, I mean, that's a whole secondary debate. But, you know, Trump is a performer. He is the master showman. And I have no doubt over the next 6 months, we're in for a huge ride with Trump. And what's happened with Gaza is just unbelievable. Nobody could have predicted that. So I have a little bit more faith in the Americans than maybe the Americans do. But it's going to be a very, very interesting next 6 months.
Thank you very much. I want to move on to Mexico and Canada next. What were the main issues that led Trump to threaten tariffs on Mexico? Was it a trade imbalance, as he says, or did immigration concerns play the biggest role in this? Raymond Vickery, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think that Trump basically has this view of Fortress America. And he has a view of the President McKinley approach prior to 1900 in terms of American power. And he wants to extend American power. He really does want Canada to be a 51st state. He really does want to take back the Panama Canal. And so the approach that he's using in regard to Canada and Mexico is a throwback to the U.S. manifest destiny, if you will, in which we moved across the North American continent. He wants to move both north and south in this regard. He obviously doesn't like immigrants, particularly those who are brown or black, who are maybe speaking Spanish. So this is a part of a pattern. This is not a normalization of interest. What he has done, of course, in his first term, he said that NAFTA was a terrible thing. And then he got into it, or his advisors got into it, and found out the United States is actually was benefiting. So he put some changes into NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, and rechristened it and said, well, we'll go forward. But now he's back to where he was originally, and that is the United States really doesn't need either Canada or Mexico economically, but it would be desirable from his point of view to aggrandize the United States by extending power into those areas. I don't see any other approach, any other reason for saying that you're going to put a 25% tariff when in fact the economic supply chains, particularly in the automotive industry, but others as well, are very much integrated. And what he's talking about is do it my way, or we'll just have our own Fortress America economically, and we won't have to deal with either one of them.
Daniel Wagner, how interesting do you think these next 4 years are going to be? I mean, is it going to be Canada and Mexico just bending the knee to Trump? I mean, obviously excluding the 50-50 first state remark. I mean, you've seen Canada spend millions and millions on their border security after Trump threatened tariffs, and you've seen Mexico willing to take all their immigrants back. Is that what's going to happen over these next 4 years?
Well, I think everyone, everyone around the world must realize that we're all in for a very wild ride for the next 4 years, and we had better buckle up our seatbelts. He is, as you know, the master of the unpredictable, and he loves the shock value of outrageous things that he might say or do. So that's certainly going to continue. Where Canada is concerned, as you know, they're in the midst of a new election for prime minister, and my guess is that they're going to have a staunch conservative who is probably going to be somewhat like-minded in terms of their own wants and needs from the U.S. Vis-a-vis the trade relationship. And I think we're going to have to tread a little carefully where Canada is concerned, especially because America gets a pretty significant portion of its oil from Canada, which affects the Western US. And until and unless the ability to make up that oil some other way from domestic production has been found, that's going to be a critical area of the relationship. Where Mexico is concerned, Claudia Sheinbaum has already demonstrated that she will not simply bend the knee, and that she is going to fight for Mexico's rights and Mexico's people. I think this could get pretty ugly pretty quickly. I don't think either leader from either country is likely to simply succumb to whatever Trump wants or demands. And I think we can expect that from just about every other country as well.
Charles Thompson, I wanted to move on to the EU now. Trump has been widely outspoken about the EU trade imbalance, and I was wondering what products will be targeted by these tariffs from the EU if the tariffs are placed on them, and how do you think the EU countries will respond? I mean, a lot of these countries in the EU, you've got Germany, the UK, as has been said previously, are in kind of a political crisis right now.
Yeah, Europe's a mixed bag because it looks like some of the countries like Hungary, Italy, Poland might break ranks. And Germany's in for an election next month, so that's a whole new ball game there. UK's in a mess at the moment. I don't think they can make any clear negotiations with Trump at the moment. So that, once again, it's a total mixed bag. If I can just briefly say, though, with Canada, what's so interesting about Canada, it's got two issues I see. One is that Canada does not realize how badly it's damaged its reputation and upset India, a full stop. The second thing, I believe the Premier of Alberta, who where all the oil comes from in Canada, has said under no way will she stop it. And she's also pointed out, and the gentleman here may be able to correct me on this, that apparently the oil is actually pumped into America, refined, and then sent back to Canada. So Canada can't physically turn off the oil, even if it wants to. Just briefly on Mexico, the drug cartels. And I believe they're fair game, and Trump's going after them. So once again, interesting times.
Does anyone want to come in and correct Sam on that? No. Raymond Vickery, did European countries implement alternative trade partnerships or policies to lessen resilience on the US market in response?
Well, there's no question that the United States is the 400-pound gorilla in the room that cannot be ignored economically. But it is also true that Europe has its own interest that will impel it to follow those interests in the security area vis-a-vis Russia. And it is not the case that economic matters are completely divorced from those of security. In fact, we only have one reality. And so Europe is not going to just say we're going to do whatever the United States wants us to in regard to Russia if Trump decides that he's going to pull back from Ukraine. And so they're going to coalesce. And the idea that they can't be in a position to negotiate because they're in difficult times now politically, I don't believe necessarily holds when it comes to something that is as unifying as national interest vis-a-vis its security matters. And so those economic factors are going to be considered in light of its overall national interest of European countries.
Daniel Wagner, one last question. How will Trump's use of tariff threats reshape the global conversation on free trade versus protectionism?
This is the danger, of course, is that we get into a spiral of protectionism from most of the world's nations. As was earlier pointed out, this happened in the 1930s, and it was not a pretty picture. I don't see why the outcome would be any different this time. Free trade is what has allowed the world to flourish as much as it has in the last century. And that is going to change if everyone gets into a protectionist mode. So I'm not very optimistic, frankly. I think we're going to have a mixed bag of those countries that will want to deal with Trump and those countries that are going to dig in their heels. And as I've said before, I think the real risk is that we get into a mishmash of those countries which abide by their agreements and those that don't. Either way, Trump is opening up a big can of worms, and I don't see how it ends well.
And with that, we run out of time, unfortunately. I want to thank my three guests, Raymond Vickery, Daniel Wagner, and Charles Thompson. Thank you very much for joining us. This is all we have time for, and we will continue to bring you more news updates on the developments that take place in the United States under the new Trump administration. We will also be back with more international news updates.